Hi, my name is Jamie Thome, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Evanston Bound Tour series, brought to you by Artist Book House. Each week we get to talk to some amazing book artists and writers, letterpress printers, and paper makers. It's such a good time. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Evanston Bound Tour, brought to you by Artist Book House. I'm Jamie Thome, and I am so excited that Pam Smy is joining us all the way from England today to talk about some of her illustrations and books and the joy of horror, I guess, and gothic writing. Pam, how are you doing?
I'm great, thanks, Jamie. It's really a privilege to join you here today. Well, this evening. Or your
Yeah,
afternoon.
it's evening there. You're 6 hours behind us here in Chicagoland.
Yeah.
So what do you do with your days now that we are all sort of locked down in the world? What do your days look like for you now?
Well, I teach. I teach in a university. I teach in an art school. I teach postgrads children's book illustration. So that takes up a lot of my time. And then I work on illustration. So when I'm not doing one, I switch to the other. I'm
Oh,
mostly in
wow.
this room. I've been in this room
And that's
since
your office space or your studio space?
with my studio space. It's a sitting room that my husband and I share. We've got a divider down the middle here, and he sits one side and I sit the other side, and we both work in here. So it's
And kind of parallel play situation.
yeah, that kind of thing.
What does he do?
He's a children's book illustration writer. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you guys are just on the two sides of the coin of doing the same thing. That is
Yeah.
so cool. Do
Yeah.
you ever talk with him about your work and just kind of bounce ideas off of each other?
Yes, absolutely. And it's really useful. He's quite reserved, and he keeps his ideas to himself, and he works very, very quietly and steadily and methodically on his books and projects. Whereas I am, oh, this just isn't going well. Come and tell me what you think. And he'll pop around my side of the desk and tell me to get a grip, or tell me what's wrong with the drawing, whichever way it's going.
Oh, I love that. You have that built-in support system right
Yeah,
there in your little office.
yeah, it's great.
So I'm going to jump in on some questions here. I just wanted to start with, how did you become a writer and book illustrator? What was the process for you growing up? Did you always know that you were a writer and an artist?
Cool. No, and actually, Jamie, I always find it really strange when people call me a writer, because although I have written words in Thornhill, I don't consider myself a writer at all.
Oh, wow.
And I grew up in a mostly bookless house, and so I didn't grow up with stories around me much at all. And my nan had a book in the sweets drawer in her house, which I would look at over and over again, but really we didn't have any books at all, and which is so strange because they have entirely become my whole life. And
Yeah.
I teach them and I make them, and as I say, my partner is a author illustrator. So but I did fall in love with drawing when I was 19, and I went to art school, and it changed my life completely. And when I was back in the day, in the olden days of the 1990s, if you did figurative drawing and observational drawing, you didn't become a fine artist. Fine artists did abstract work, and you were recommended to go to a fine art college and fine art BA course, as we would say here. But if you drew figuratively, then you became an illustrator. So I went off to Cambridge School of Art, where I now teach, and I studied 3 years an undergrad course, and then went back a few years later and did a postgrad, and I've been teaching on it in the same place ever since.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so books, drawing, illustration became my life, and it's only latterly that I thought, okay, I'm going to try the old writing thing. So
Right. So that is fascinating that you didn't grow up with books, but now they are it for you. And it's also fascinating how you say you're not a writer, and yet the story, because I have some questions about Thornhill, but just the elegance of your writing in this book is just something that struck me is how elegant the prose pieces are. And I wonder, do you read a lot? I mean, you clearly partner with authors to do their illustrations for their books, so you're exposed to a lot of writers. How did that manifest for you, the writing piece of it?
So yes, only through reading, and actually I dropped out of school really quite young, so I don't even have A levels. I don't have any A level English. I don't know what the equivalent in the US is of an A level.
Would that be like our high school diplomas?
I guess so. We have a basic general exam which we all take when we are 16, and then you specialize a little bit, and those A levels, those specialist exams, are the ones that get you into university. They're a stepping stone.
Okay.
And I dropped out at that point, and so I really didn't. I don't have any English qualifications, and I never studied at university. And in fact, when I went to art school and I was studying illustration, in my second year of study, I used to be really shy. Second study, a tutor came around and he said, "So tell me about yourself, what projects do you want to do?" And I said, "I don't really know." And he said, "Well, tell me about yourself, what are your hobbies?" And I said, "Well, I just do drawing." And he said, "Well, what do you read?" And I say, "I don't really read anything." And he went ballistic. He was saying, how can you be an illustrator if you can't tell the difference between different types of genre? You don't know about, or voice. You can't understand the feeling between different types of books. And he wrote me a list and he said, "Go into town, go and buy these books, read them before next week, and I'll give you another tutorial." And that changed my life. That list of books.
Wow.
And it was fantastic. And now I can't move. I can't
with all the books.
Because of all the books.
Well, now I'm so curious as to what's on that list, or what do you remember from that list? I know it's been years because it was the 90s, but what was on the list?
Anita Bruckner's Hotel du Lac, which won the Booker Prize, and essentially other things by Anita Bruckner, and they're all stories of lonely women, lonely middle-class women who have some almost non-events happen in their lives. So it's very, very closed, compact, tiny details. And what else? I think 5 Years Sentence, I think, by Bernice Rubens. So they were all novels about women. Then I read Hotel du Lac, and then I read everything that Anita Bruckner had.
Of course.
Didn't stop from
there.
So
do you feel like he noticed something in your drawings that led him to recommend these very bubbled stories, these sort of wrapped stories about, and I mean wrapped, R-A-P-T, wrapped stories about women with do you think that he saw something in that?
I think so. Well, I was doing lots of location drawing at the time. My partner at the time, back in the olden days, was a musician, and he would play in lots of working men's clubs and bars and at weddings and some quite rough joints, and I would go with him, help set up the stage, and then sit in a corner with a sketchbook until the end of the night, and I'd pack up and we'd go back again. So it meant that I was sitting watching the dynamics between people a great deal, and drawing what would happen mostly to the women. So there would be quite a masculine culture at the time, and there would be groups of blokes going up to the bar and being very rowdy and very noisy, and the women would be taken a small glass of white wine at their table, and they stayed there. And so I was watching lots of this kind of thing and drawing a lot of it, and I think from that he made the suggestions.
Oh, I love that. And so then you sort of moved into this world of words as well. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I understood more what was needed in terms of illustration. I only ever thought about reading as pleasure, as pure delight, and also what it could teach me about image making and how you'd create atmosphere or tension between, you know, characters or whatever, and how I could translate that into imaginative work. So it all came from an illustrator's point of view, the love of reading.
Yeah, and are you able to imagine when you're reading even just a novel, does it drive your brain, your illustrator brain, to think in certain ways?
Absolutely.
Is that what happens inside you when you're reading?
Yes, and when I'm reading and when I'm writing as well, when I think of any ideas, I think of them visually first. I play them like a film in my head, and then it's trying to capture that and put that into some form of words, rather than think about or enjoy the prose itself. It's the translation from the pictures in my head first.
Okay, that was actually one of my questions. How do you balance the writing and illustrating, and which one comes first? So thank you for preemptively answering it. I love that. I feel like you're reading my brain a little bit on our conversation. So yeah, I wanna talk a little bit about Thornhill. And I put down here that your novel Thornhill is really two stories that intertwine. One story of Jane's story, set in 1982, is the orphanage story, and it's through the prose, it's through the writing, and it's her diary, diary entries that happen over the course of I think spring and summer. I can't remember if it starts in April or earlier. And then the other story of Ella is set in 2017, and that's all told through imagery. The only text in Ella's story comes from newspaper clippings in the drawings. So how did that choice happen for you of how to tell these two stories? They do intertwine, of course, and they're not just two separate stories of two young women near this house, but so they do come together. But how did that idea of having those two strands happen for you? Why did you make the choice for Jane's story to be told through her diary, and then Ella's story through the illustrations? How did that come together for you?
I love how you're calling her Jane, because her name is Mary.
Oh my gosh! But I am so sorry. I don't know where I got Jane from.
That makes me so happy, because I plugged so much of Jane Eyre into that.
That's what it was from. My subconscious is telling me it's Jane. Oh my God.
Yeah, if you were calling her Trevor or something.
Sorry. Oh, how weird. I have goosebumps, because that is haunting. That just right there is just haunting, that I was calling her Jane. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I think it's great.
Mary's story is told through her. Yeah. Wow. And I wasn't even thinking that while I was reading it. That is so, it was literally, I sat down, and just typed out the questions, and it just was like, oh yeah, her name's Jane. What?
Well, I'm happy to bring it on. So these stories, to two story strands, again, when I think of stories these days, they're always based on place.
Okay.
They're always somewhere real that I've seen, or somewhere I've seen. And in the particular case of Thornhill, I was thank you. Yeah,
I'm going to actually switch to a gallery view real quick and just show. I had you on speaker view, but this is the cover of Thornhill. If our people who haven't been paying attention, or haven't got the book, this is Thornhill, and it's very thick, and it's, like I said, it's alternates between illustration and text with the. I just wanted to hold that up. Now I'm going to go back to speaker view. So it's just you on the screen. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, so I was out walking with my dog, and I was supposed to come up with an idea in advance of going to meet a publisher. He said to me, come to my office and bring your portfolio and bring me any story in the world you'd like to do. And I thought, this is really, in the UK, it's a really innovative publisher. And I was so excited, but I just had a complete blank. I thought, I can't think of any, what I really want to do. What would be in my soul to do. And but then I saw this house in Cambridge, and Cambridge is a very wealthy city because of the university, and we don't have a lot of development. We don't have any industries that have come and gone. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. But there was this one house I walked past that was all boarded up, and it had wood inside the windows, and it had an overgrown tree over the fence that the builders had put around it, and had keep up signs around it. And it's quite unusual to see that kind of thing in Cambridge, so I just stopped with my sketchbook and drew it. And I remembered the love I had as a kid of going into spaces and exploring. And I thought, I really felt at that point, I really want to go over that wall, and I really want to know what's in it, what those grounds are like that I can't see.
Yeah.
So, that thing about something as being forbidden, and how enticing that is. And then I thought, well, what if there was a kid in there? What if there was a child in there? Why would they be there in a boarded up house? What would the story be? And as I walked home, I just thought of my favourite books, my favourite stories, and what they had in common, and how that might link to the house. And then by the time I got home, a 40-minute walk, I had the idea for 2 girls in 2 different places in 2 different times.
Oh, I love this.
And then I thought, well, if you have something that like a boarded up house or a abandoned house, that's got a kind of Gothic feel to it. What's the opposite? It's where I live. It's my everyday world. So I climbed into my bathroom and stood and looked out my bathroom window and drew the houses I see at the back of the houses that back onto my house.
Yeah.
Because it's just so everyday and classless. It can be in any town and any kind of environment. And then that's where Ella would live in these kind of regular houses, and Mary would live in this abandoned house.
Yeah.
And then I knew there would be 2 different stories, and from there it was just, I'm going to say easy, but that sounds really arrogant. It was just so obvious to me how it would all pan out from that point.
Yeah, they told the characters themselves and the places themselves sort of grew into the story and kind of grew from there organically for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And actually, once I worked out who Mary was and why she was there, and I borrowed very heavily from Mary, literally from Secret Garden, and thought I'd steal all of that and just make it older and darker, and combine all my favourite elements from that in that mysterious house she has to go and live in.
Yeah, so you switched things a little bit with making it more goth and creepier. I love that. Oh my gosh, I just love that. And that sort of also leads to another question about influence from literature, because clearly Jane Eyre was an influence, but also Secret Garden. Were there other influences to this story or other stories that you tell that sort of seep their way into your soul out through the books?
Yeah, there's a couple but there are 3 books that have bullying as a central theme.
Mm-hmm.
One is Cat's Eye by Margaret Atwood.
Oh yes,
which I've read twice years ago, and I haven't read, but it stays with you. Obviously.
Yeah, I haven't read that since it was. I think I read it it's been 20 some years since I read that one.
Yeah.
I think I don't remember. Yeah. And what else?
There's a book called for children, older children, called The Tulip Touch by Anne Fine.
Oh, I don't know that one.
It's about two girls a girl who becomes friends with a new girl in town called Tulip, and about their dynamic between them. Mm-hmm. And there's the other one is I'm the King of the Castle by Susan Hill. And so at the beginning of the story, I actually make a poster of that, which doesn't exist, that Ella is putting on her bedroom wall in the new house.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a story, it's actually taught in schools here, but it's a story about 2 boys whose parents become in a relationship. And it's about...
Oh, so they are stepbrothers.
They become stepbrothers, and about the connection between them. And both Cat's Eye and the King of the Castle, there's both this element in the story where the bully becomes the victim, even for a little while, and those tables turn. so there was those 3 books about the dynamic of the bullying relationship, and then there was Jane Eyre, obviously the best book in the world, and The Secret Garden, and Rebecca by Daphne.
Oh yes, I see that now that you mention it too.
So Rebecca, because the new Mrs. Dawson was never mentioned by name, so
Yeah,
I wanted
yeah.
to see if I could do something similar with the never mentioning the
The
bully.
bully's name.
Yeah.
Yes.
And also
Wow.
all 3 of them have these big houses.
Yeah.
Both in Rebecca and in Jane Eyre, they have a similar outcome for the house.
Yeah.
So,
Sort of the Gothic manner.
yeah.
Yeah.
So those were the main influences. And there's also a tiny little short story called My Brother's Ghost by Alan Allberg. I don't know if anybody knows it. It's very small. It's got a beautiful little cover here, illustrated by Gillian Tyler. Anyway, it's a very, very short story about a sibling that dies and comes back to look after his brothers. So there's that ghost story element I loved too.
Oh, I wish I had a pen. I will have to.
I will email them to you, Jamie.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that would be great. And actually, it would be great because then we can have the list of influences on the YouTube description. That would be phenomenal to have that. Because I know I am fascinated by how artists, and I'm an artist, and a book artist, but I'm not, and I'm a writer, but I'm not an illustrator, and I'm not published, but I'm like, I am always fascinated by how people come to what they are doing and what the influences are, even if the influences are not, I am influenced by this blatant in the stories. So I know other people are as fascinated as I am. So that would be great if you could email those. Thank you.
I like myself a note.
Yes. So, oh my gosh, and Rebecca, that totally makes sense now in this. I'm fondling the cover because it's got kind of a, the house shape on the cover, of course, is embossed. So it kind of, it's really, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to my next question. Thornhill is both classic Gothic haunted house tale and a traumatic story of a bully relationship. And oh, you know what? Never mind. This question we've already talked about. That is an interesting combination and what stories inspired you. So never mind. I already did that. Okay. So one thing that I also wanted to talk with you specifically about is the idea of trauma and grief being an influence on sort of a haunted terror story. And I really get that in this story, and I don't know how to describe it other than there's a lot of sadness in this that I noticed. And I don't know if other people have mentioned that to you before. There's definitely loneliness, of course, with Mary being isolating herself in the attic room, I guess is what it could be called. But also Ella has some grief that is in, that I sort of just gathered in the imagery. What do you think about that idea of trauma and loss and grief influencing the fear and terror in a scary story or in a spooky story? Am I just kind of making this up as I go? Or is that something that's really was driving you in a way? Like, I really, as I'm reading this, you know, there's definitely tension and there's definitely suspense, of course, and it is a spooky story. But I did get this melancholy and loss sense in it. So can you speak to us a little bit about that?
Yes, yes, both slightly in terms of how it relates to ghost stories. I suppose there is a tradition of the very idea of ghosts. I suppose there's that thing of the idea of it being that somebody is too sad or has been disrupted in this world and doesn't want to move on to the next world. There's that kind of lingering.
Right.
Or we would have, you know, in the turn of the screw, you might have ghosts that are terrorizing. You know, there's a trauma in the house, there's a trauma in relationships that are then residual. So I think there's a tradition of it. I tended to, when I wrote Thornhill, I was thinking much more in terms of, well, I'm going to take a step back, Jamie, and just say I'm really interested in folk stories and fairy stories and stories of everyday people, where you can have really bittersweet moments. You can have really dark things happen alongside magical things and wonderful things, or in everyday life people go through extraordinary things and come out the other side, and it can be part and parcel of how we live, and quite often we don't get to see that. So I'm kind of interested in that idea generally, in those sort of bittersweet stories. And I also lecture on books about issues. So for my postgrads, I'm talking about books about grief and about refugees or you know, divorce or whatever. And so it's something I really believe in, that we don't need to sugarcoat things for children because they're sharing our slightly messy lives. And so I think I felt that if I was dealing with those kind of subjects, and I think some of them are sad, that actually then giving them a coating of the Gothic or the ghost story is like a wrapping, in which you can then say, well, what I'm reading is a step removed, because it's a ghost story. It's not all real, or because there is this supernatural element to it. Whereas if I think I was doing actual writing realism and illustrating complete realism, I think that would be a harder pill to swallow.
I understand what you're saying. It gives it sort of a window to look through.
Yes.
As opposed to, so you're separate a little bit, but you're not too close to the thing, but you're right there, observing it and seeing it. I love that. Thank you for that explanation. That's just lovely. So one of the other things that I wanted to ask about for Thornhill particularly is Ella's story. And can you talk a little bit about it and flesh out some of the ideas that I have in my head? Because I get the sense of her grief as well. And I'm not sure 100%. She's lacking her mother. So I don't know if her mother has died or if her mother is just separate. If there was a divorce and the dad got custody, and of course he's too busy to be at home. But can you speak a little bit about Ella's world and her realistic portion of things, and then how she sort of uses the next door Thornhill house, and it's kind of a refuge for her, but it's also, she finds these old doll parts and starts to put together the puppets and works through a little bit of her sadness through that, is what I read or got from it. So can you speak a little bit about the character of Ella and her story?
Sure. Yes, it's really interesting for me, this the absence of the mother is a big thing, isn't it? Again, it's something that happens at the beginning of lots of fairy tales, that the good mother dies, and whatever that means. But I did want her to be absent, and for us not to know why, so that we didn't have a judgment. But really interestingly, I think in the States, not quite a few of the reviews assumed that she was dead. And not that she was just absent or had chosen not to be there. So I think I needed there to be an implication that there was an upheaval of some kind, an emotional upheaval, and a physical one because she's had to move, and that there would have been some kind of family trauma, whatever that is. I don't know what it is. I never discovered. But that there was something that would have made them her and her dad to have to leave, and and maybe to give a reason why the dad may not be coping himself, and then
Yeah.
maybe a reason why he's disengaged from Ella, and that the things that Ella needs aren't being catered for in some
Yeah.
way. You know,
From a
something
parent, from a parent.
yeah, something
Yeah.
has happened, and maybe we don't need the backstory. We'd like one, I think.
Yeah. No, I
But
think we might create one too,
I think,
because like you said, and that's the tradition, is that in traditional fairy tales, the mother either dies. There's no either or, she dies.
yeah,
And I think that might be why people here have said, oh, she's dead, as opposed to she might just not be there.
yeah,
I find that fascinating. So we're building in that past for Ella, and it's interesting that you didn't have that sort of outlined behind her.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I love what you said about the dad he's coping with his own grief, and that's probably the reason why he's not there. He's not just a busy man.
yeah.
So that makes it a little bit more poignant, his little notes and his, response when she's missing in the newspaper cuttings. Oh, good Lord, it's so sad.
Sorry, Jamie.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, I actually have been rewatching Haunting of Hill House and have listened to the story again, as opposed to reading the novel, listening to the Haunting of Hill House,
Yeah.
just to prepare myself for Halloween situation.
Yeah.
Series of A House Haunted series of events for Artist Book House, but the overlying theme, or underlying, I guess, the theme that wraps around all of these stories right now for me is that idea of trauma and grief manifesting itself in this situation in a ghost, or loneliness, melancholy, all of those layers to not like the gory, slasher movies or slasher stories, because that's not what I'm talking about, but the idea of the hope of a ghost, that your loved one isn't really gone, or like you said, that lingering for a person or even an animal ghost, but to be here still. So for this story in particular, for Thornhill, what was Mary's impetus? Oh, I don't want to give anything away. For those people who haven't read it yet, Mary is the next door. I mean, I think it's sort of indicated at the beginning of the story, so I'm not giving anything away. And I want to say, spoiler alert, pause the video and fast forward if you don't want to hear what Mary's impetus for sticking around Thornhill after she passes away, after she dies. What was her goal? And I think that comes up at the end of the book, and then with the process they go through. I have given away so many spoilers, I just am. Anyway, can you speak to Mary's, I keep wanting to call her Jane, Mary's drive in the story, I guess, in Ella's story, and also in her own?
I think
does that question make sense?
Yeah, so you're asking what is it that's happened to Mary, or what is it about Mary that will keep her in the circumstances that she maintains
yes, that she finds herself in the illustrative part of the story.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, that's a weird way of putting it. The ghost. She's the ghost.
She's the ghost. Okay, we're gonna go there.
We're gonna go there.
So she's for me, Mary. Yes, it's that sense of wanting to belong somewhere. So neither Mary nor Ella necessarily are happy with their very, very different lives. And Mary in particular could have the possibility all the time of moving on, finding a new family, whatever, but she's thwarted by her own circumstances and her own emotional issues. I was very, very keen, and it came up a lot in our editorial meetings, that Mary is sad, not bad, that she
Yeah.
is that she's not a malevolent being, that she doesn't intend for destruction. It's just that all the cards are stacked against her.
Yeah.
And it was my editor's idea that gradually, one after the other of the support mechanisms one might have are taken away from her during the course of the story. Show someone who may start as melancholy, may lose the trust of the carer in the home, may think she's found some friends and then they're taken away, or they take themselves away, that the GP ends up not being as reliable as we all want him to be, the friendly cook leaves, so that there's this cascade of absence until really Mary's circumstances become more and more desperate, and the thing that remains is her and the house, and her relationship with this very odd place that has become her home. And that all the time she's just longing to fit in with something, somewhere, with someone, and that you know, and that's her, that she'll almost do anything to be able to have that kind of affection.
And I think also one thing in both stories that you've captured is the adolescent young girl, and how, you know, you can be surrounded by people and feel lonely, and you can have awkwardness and have that drive you in a way, and not have that support, or not feel the support that you desire as a young adolescent girl. And I think you captured that. And like I said, again, your writing in the diary part is so elegant. There were sentences in the diary that I was like, what? And you just have to pause a minute to just breathe, let the sentence breathe. And I meant to I meant to like indicate with Post-its some of those sentences, but I read it too fast. I couldn't stop and do that. It just strikes me as a lovely story of young adolescent femalehood and loneliness. So I just wanted to say that to you.
Thank you.
I really appreciated that, as far as the ghost story goes too. Having that layer of young, like in my head they were, 13, maybe 12, just on the cusp, and just that really weird time.
Such a difficult age, isn't it? I don't, I would never go back to being a teenager.
No.
I don't care how droopy I get and how tired I get, how grey I'm going.
Or how much money someone said you can go back with all your knowledge and all this money. Like, no.
Wouldn't do it.
No.
It's and also there's that thing when one is young and one wants to fit in, that as I think Mary does in the story, that you try to do it with people that you think you don't actually like necessarily. You know that you don't. It's not everything you do is born out of affection or respect. It can be done through just awkwardness or discomfort or yearning or all of those strange emotions that swill around.
I love that. Well, thank you for writing this gorgeous book. And I also want to ask about your new novel that comes out next year. Can you tell us a little bit about it? I didn't write down the name because I know it doesn't come out. Is it out there?
No,
and it just
I haven't
come out here?
I should have finished working on it by now, and I'm behind, Jamie.
Oh, goodness.
due to first time in my life, due to the complications of the coronavirus. Yes, it's called The Hideaway, and it's a story told in 2 strands, but it's much more of it's an illustrated novel, so it's not a picture sequence and a word sequence, but it's 2 different threads of the same story. but there is a graveyard near here where I walk my dog in the mornings, and in the graveyard is a poem by Frances Cornford, and it talks about, it's called the November Tree, All Souls Eve anyway, and it's about the ghosts coming back on All Souls Eve and being reunited with the people they love most. So I've written the strands of the two strands of the story to think about what would happen if someone was wanting to be reunited with their loved ones in that particular place.
Oh, wow. And is it also young adults or geared towards middle grades? That's okay.
It's a little bit younger. It's not quite so dark as Thornhill. So it's 9+ age group.
Oh, can't wait until that comes out and we have it over here as well. Thank you so much for this conversation. I am touched that you joined me today, and I am honored to have heard your words and your lovely, lovely thoughts on all things grief and loss and horror, Gothic. And I really, really want to thank you. I appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And it's lovely to get the chance to talk to you, Jamie. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us for this special edition of Evanston Bound Tour with Pam Smy. You can find Thornhill, which is written and illustrated by her. Actually, it's two stories that intertwine. You can find that at your favorite local independent bookshop or at your favorite library. Please look it up because it is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. Thank you to Pam for joining us all the way from England, and we are lucky to have had you. Hi again. Thank you so much for watching this week's Tour. We really appreciate your support. If you want to learn more about our guest from today, please read the description below. And if you'd like to support more programming like this, coming from Artist Bookhouse, please visit our website at artistbookhouse.org/donate. Thank you again for joining us.